Have you ever felt a tear roll down your face but couldn't even lift a finger to wipe it away? That was my life for 6 months. Imagine being the man who built the future, a pioneer of the digital age, only to be treated like a piece of discarded trash in your own living room. I'm sharing this because I need you to know that all the money in the world can't protect you from the monsters you invite into your home. Before we dive into the day, my life turned into a high-tech horror movie. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching this from? I see people from all over the world tuning in, and your support is the only thing that kept me sane during the darkest chapters of my life. Don't forget to subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you is something the headlines never caught. My name is Grant, and a year ago I was on top of the world. I was the CEO of the most innovative tech firm in San Francisco. I had a vision of a world where technology and biology were seamless. My penthouse was a $50 million masterpiece of glass and steel, overlooking the bay, managed by an AI system I designed myself called Aura. I thought I had everything: the career, the wealth, and the beautiful, devoted wife Tessa. Then came the accident. A freak electrical malfunction in my autonomous vehicle sent me off a bridge. I survived, but the impact crushed my spine. I woke up in a world of silence, quadriplegic, locked in. To the doctors, I was a medical miracle who was essentially a vegetable. To the world, I was a fallen giant. But to Tessa and my private physician, Dr. Holloway, I was just a bronze statue, a heavy, useless object that happened to own a multi-billion-dollar empire they couldn't wait to dismantle. Every day was a repetitive cycle of psychological torture. They kept me in the center of the penthouse, propped up in a specialized medical chair that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows. I could see the city I helped build, but I couldn't even blink on command. They thought my mind was gone. They thought the lights were on, but nobody was home. They were so convinced of my cognitive death that they stopped pretending. I remember the first time I realized the depth of their betrayal. It was a Tuesday evening. The sun was setting, casting a bloody orange hue over the Pacific. Tessa walked into the room, wearing a silk dress that cost more than most people make in a year. She didn't look at me with pity or love. She looked at me with disgust. She reached out and touched my cheek, not with a caress, but to test if I was sweating. "Still warm?" she whispered, her voice like ice. "How much longer, Arlo?" Dr. Holloway, the man I had paid $1 million retainer to ensure my recovery, walked in behind her. He didn't have his stethoscope or his professional demeanor. He had a bottle of my finest vintage scotch in one hand and his arm around my wife's waist in the other. They stood right in front of me, inches from my frozen eyes, and they kissed. It wasn't a quick kiss. It was a celebratory one. "His vitals are stable, unfortunately," Holloway said, pouring 2 glasses of the scotch I had saved for my 10th anniversary. "He's a strong bastard, but his brain activity is a flatline. He's just a biological hard drive with no operating system left. He's scrap metal, Tessa." The physical pain of the accident was nothing compared to the searing, white-hot agony of hearing the woman I worship describe me as a burden and a paycheck. Holloway was worse. He would come up to me during my checkups and mock me. "You know, Grant, I'm giving her everything you couldn't. I'm spending your money, drinking your wine, and loving your wife. And the best part, you're paying me to do it." 6 months. For 6 months, I endured their insults. They were so sure they had won. They saw a broken body and assumed the soul had departed. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the very technology they mocked was the only thing keeping me alive. Every night I sat in the dark. I focused on the tiny, flickering status light of the Aura interface on the wall. It was a soft, pulsing blue. To me, it was a heartbeat. I remembered the code. I remembered the protocols. I remembered the back door I had built into the system that no one else knew existed. The reflection of the blue status light in the glass of the window was a small spark of defiance in the vast, cold darkness of my new reality. The blue pulse of the status light wasn't just a flicker in the dark. It was a digital heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder that while my muscles had withered, my mind had migrated. Every time Tessa laughed in the next room or Dr. Holloway bragged about the luxury car he planned to buy with my inheritance, that blue light seemed to throb with a shared silent fury. I stared at it until the rest of the world blurred into a gray haze, focusing all my willpower on the invisible bridge I had built between my consciousness and the silicon soul of this house. 2 weeks before the accident, the night the brakes on my car decided to ignore my commands, I had undergone a secret procedure. It was the culmination of a decade of research, something I called Link 7. In the high-tech circles of Silicon Valley, people talked about neural interfaces as a dream for the distant future, but I was living it. I had a proprietary chip thinner than a human hair woven into my cervical spine. It was designed to bypass damaged nerves to allow a human to control machines with a thought. I had installed it as a prototype, a safety net for the very future I was building. I never expected it to become my only lifeline. The recovery wasn't physical, it was informational. While Tessa and Holloway stood over me discussing which of my private paintings they would sell, first I was busy relearning how to breathe in binary. I couldn't move my lungs, but I could feel the airflow sensors in the HVAC system. I couldn't blink my eyes, but I could see through the 4K lenses tucked into the corners of every room. I was the ghost in my own machine, a digital phantom haunting the very halls I had paid for. Through Aura's eyes, the truth began to unspool like a corrupted video file. I didn't need to guess about the betrayal anymore. I had the metadata. I spent the long, lonely nights accessing the encrypted logs of my home network. I found the traces of the remote hack that had disabled my car's safety protocols on the night of the crash. It wasn't an electrical glitch, it was a targeted strike. I watched a saved recording from the garage's security feed footage they thought they had deleted, showing Tessa handing a thumb drive to a man in a dark hoodie just hours before I left for that final fateful drive. The discovery hit me harder than the impact of the car against the bridge. It wasn't just greed, it was cold-blooded attempted murder. My wife, the woman who had cried at our wedding and promised to grow old with me, had priced my life at the value of my stock portfolio. And Holloway. He wasn't just a doctor. He was the one who had provided the medical schematics of my car's interface to the hacker. They weren't waiting for me to die. They had tried to kill me, and failed. And now they were simply finishing the job through neglect and psychological warfare. "He's staring at that light again," Tessa remarked one afternoon, snapping me back to the physical world. She walked over her heels, clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. She leaned down, her face so close I could smell the expensive wine on her breath. She didn't look for a sign of life. She looked at her own reflection in my pupils. "It's creepy, Arlo. Like he's judging us." Holloway didn't even look up from his tablet. "He's a vegetable, Tess. The lights are on because of autonomic reflexes, nothing more. He's as judging as a toaster. Just make sure the lawyers have the eye-scan consent forms ready. The board is getting restless about the CEO vacancy." The irony was almost poetic. They were terrified of my judgment, yet they were the ones handing me the keys to their destruction. Every time they used their biometric passes to move through the house, every time they spoke in front of a dormant smart speaker, they were feeding my database. I was building a digital dossier of their crimes bite by agonizing bite. I learned about their secret offshore accounts. I heard them argue about how to split the money. I even heard Holloway admit that he had been over-medicating me with sedatives to keep my brain activity low for the official medical reports. But I wasn't just collecting data. I was practicing. My first victory was a small one. A week ago, I managed to send a single command to the kitchen's coffee maker. The sound of it grinding beans in the middle of the night had sent Tessa into a screaming fit, convinced the house was haunted. I watched through the hallway camera as she clung to Holloway, trembling in her silk robe. It was the first time I felt a spark of joy since the crash. It wasn't just a glitch, it was a declaration of war. The emotional layers of my existence were shifting. The initial despair had been replaced by a cold, clinical patience. I stopped being a victim and started being an architect again. I spent my days simulating the lockdown protocols in the background of Aura's processor. I mapped out the ventilation shafts, the electronic deadbolts, and the emergency pressure seals. I was turning my home into a fortress, and my captors were the ones walking right into the center of the trap. There were moments, though, when the human part of me screamed out. I would watch Tessa wear the necklace I bought her for our 5th anniversary, while she whispered filth into Holloway's ear, and the rage would nearly overheat the chip in my spine. My internal temperature sensors would spike, and I'd have to force myself to calibrate to push the emotion down into the logic gates. I couldn't afford a mistake. If they realized I was awake before the Link 7 was fully integrated with the house's core, Holloway would simply pull the plug and I would vanish into the blackness. The most difficult part was the eye scan sessions. They would force my eyelids open using cold metal retractors to keep me from blinking while they tried to get my biometric signature to authorize fund transfers. I had to learn how to desensitize my retinas to keep my gaze fixed and vacant while the infrared lasers mapped my eyes. I could feel the burning sensation of dry, stinging heat, but I remained a statue. If I reacted, if I showed even a flicker of recognition, the game would be over. One evening, after a particularly brutal session where Holloway had joked about poking the lizard to see if I'd twitch, they left me alone in the dark. The city lights began to twinkle outside a million points of life that I was no longer a part of. But inside the penthouse, the air felt different. I could feel the vibration of the servers in the basement. I could hear the faint hum of the electricity running through the walls. I wasn't just in the house. I was the house. I began to experiment with the feedback loops. I realized that the more I synced with Aura, the more I could simulate physical sensations. I couldn't feel my legs, but I could feel the weight of the furniture on the pressure-sensitive floor tiles. I couldn't smell the air, but I could analyze the chemical composition of the room's atmosphere. I was becoming something more than human, a digital deity born from betrayal and silicon. Tessa came in later that night alone this time. She sat on the edge of the medical bed looking out at the skyline. For a second, just one fleeting second, she looked sad. She reached out and touched my hand, the hand she had once promised to hold forever. "I wish it didn't have to be like this, Grant," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "But you were always so obsessed with your work. You were already gone long before the car hit the water. I just wanted someone who would actually look at me." For a moment, the human Grant wanted to forgive her. The man who had loved her wanted to believe she was a victim of loneliness. But then she pulled her hand away and checked her phone. It was a message from Holloway. Her face instantly transformed, the faux sadness replaced by a sharp, hungry greed. She stood up, wiped an imaginary speck of dust from her skirt, and walked out without looking back. The last trace of my mercy evaporated with the click of her bedroom door. I realized then that she didn't just want a new life. She wanted to erase mine entirely. She didn't see a person in that chair. She saw an obstacle. I turned my focus back to the blue light, but this time, I didn't just watch it. I reached out with the Link 7, pushing through the final encryption layers of the house's master control. I felt the surge of data, a massive wave of information that threatened to drown my consciousness. I pushed harder, ignoring the phantom pain blooming at the base of my skull. The blue light on the wall flickered, then turned a deep, menacing violet. Aura's voice, the one I had programmed to be soothing and helpful, whispered directly into my neural link, bypassing my ears entirely. System integration at 98%, Grant. Security protocols standing by. I looked at the reflection of the room in the dark glass of the window. I saw the silhouette of my motionless body, the high-tech medical equipment, and the expensive art on the walls. It looked like a museum of a dead man. But beneath the surface, the power was shifting. I could feel the cooling fans in the server room spinning faster, a low-frequency growl that resonated through the floorboards and into the frame of my chair. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the room dropped by exactly 5 degrees. It was a subtle change, one that only a computer or a man connected to one would notice. I watched the condensation begin to form on the inside of the double-paned glass. Tiny droplets of water blurring the view of the city I no longer cared to join. My focus was now entirely within these 4 walls. I waited for the sound of Holloway's footsteps in the hall, my digital eyes tracking the heat signatures moving behind the bedroom door. The infrared heat signatures moving behind the master bedroom door were more than just glowing blobs on a screen. To me, they were the thermal footprints of a conspiracy. I watched through Aura's eyes as the two silhouettes merged and separated, their muffled whispers vibrating through the structural sensors in the walls. For months, I had been the silent audience to their betrayal. But as the clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from a stagnant waiting room to a high-tech gallows. The condensation on the windows had begun to freeze into intricate, jagged patterns, obscuring the San Francisco skyline and turning my world into a frosted cage. By 6 a.m., the professional facade returned. Tessa emerged from the bedroom, her face a mask of practiced grief, followed by Dr. Holloway, who adjusted his silk tie with the clinical precision of a man who had forgotten the meaning of the Hippocratic Oath. Today was the day. I could feel it in the frantic pace of their heartbeats, which Aura's biometric sensors picked up from across the room. They weren't just here for a routine checkup, they were here for the kill the digital kind. Is the legal team on standby? Tessa asked, her voice devoid of the softness she had used the night before when she thought I was sleeping. She stood by the kitchen island tapping her manicured nails against the marble. "They're in the lobby," Holloway replied, checking his watch. "We have a 30-minute window before the board meeting starts. Once we get the iris authorization and the multi-factor digital signature, the trust dissolves into your private account. Grant officially retires due to medical incapacity, and we're out of here by noon." I sat in my chair, my spine tingling with the phantom heat of the Link 7 chip. They moved toward me like vultures, circling a carcass they assumed was already cold. Holloway reached into his leather bag and pulled out a sleek, titanium-cased tablet. It was the master key to my empire, the interface I had designed to be the most secure financial portal on the planet. To unlock it, the system required a 3-tier authentication: a live iris scan, a specific retinal pulse, and a conscious digital handshake via the neural interface. They thought they only needed the first two. They thought they could force the third. "Let's get this over with." Tessa sighed, standing behind my chair. She grabbed my hair, pulling my head back with a sharp yank to stabilize my neck. The pain was sharp and real, but I didn't let it reach my face. I remained a statue, my eyes fixed on the empty air in front of me. "He's so stiff today. It's like his body is turning into actual lead." Holloway leaned in his face inches from mine. I could see the pores in his skin, the slight tremor in his hand that suggested he was more nervous than he let on. He pulled out a pair of specialized surgical retractors. "Hold him still, Tess. If he blinks or shifts, the laser won't map the capillaries correctly." The cold steel of the retractors touched my eyelids. They pried them open, forcing my eyes wide until the air dried out my corneas. It was an agonizing, stinging sensation, a slow burn that felt like needles being pressed into my brain. Most men would have screamed. I didn't even twitch. I channeled the pain through the link, converting the biological distress into a data stream. I watched the tablet's interface through my own internal connection. I saw the awaiting biometric input screen. I saw the red laser beam start to sweep across my vision. "Scanning?" the tablet's voice chirped. It was a voice I had programmed. It sounded like a mockery of my own creation. "Come on, Grant," Holloway muttered under his breath, his eyes darting between the tablet and my frozen pupils. "Just stay still for 10 more seconds and I'll give you enough sedative to sleep for a century." As the laser mapped my right eye, Holloway reached for a syringe he had laid out on the side table. It was filled with a clear, viscous liquid. I knew exactly what it was: a high-potency neuroinhibitor. It wouldn't kill me instantly, but it would suppress my brain's autonomic functions enough to trigger a natural cardiac arrest within 2 hours. It was the perfect murder, no struggle, no suspicion, just a tragic end to a tragic condition. "Retinal map confirmed," the tablet announced. "Step 2. Please provide the neural handshake." Tessa stiffened. "What is that? You said we just needed his eyes." "It's a secondary security layer," Holloway hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "It looks for a specific frequency of brain activity. It's supposed to prove he's conscious and consenting. Don't worry, I have the bypass frequency we pulled from his earlier lab notes. Aura initiate external neural override code, Alpha 9 Omega." I felt a surge of external electricity hit the Link 7. It was an unauthorized handshake attempt, a digital crowbar trying to pry open my mind. It felt like a seizure without the shaking, a violent, jarring vibration behind my ears. Holloway was trying to spoof my consciousness using my own research to rob me. In the digital realm, I met the intrusion head-on. I didn't just block it, I absorbed it. Every bit of data Holloway sent to override me became more fuel for my connection to Aura. I was overclocking. The chip in my spine was running so hot I feared it might melt the surrounding tissue, but the rage kept me steady. I saw the tablet's progress bar crawl to 99%. "Almost there," Tessa whispered, her grip on my hair tightening. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. Just one more second and we own everything, Arlo. No more playing nurse. No more looking at this pathetic shell of a man. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing against my ear. You were always so smart, Grant. But you forgot one thing: people aren't machines. We break, we lie, and we win. I watched the processing icon spin on the screen. The air in the penthouse began to hum. It was a low-frequency sound, a vibration that started in the walls and moved into the furniture. Holloway noticed it this time. He looked around, frowning at the ceiling. "What is that noise?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's just the wind, Arlo. Focus on the tablet," Tessa snapped. But it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of 6 massive server racks in the basement, spinning up to maximum capacity. It was the sound of the building's power grid being rerouted. I was no longer just a handshake in the system. I was the system. I bypassed the tablet's security protocols and locked the authorization in a recursive loop. The screen didn't turn green. It didn't say, "Transfer complete." Instead, the display turned a violent flickering crimson. A single line of text appeared, written in a font that wasn't part of the standard OS. It was my personal handwriting digitized. "Are you sure you want to do that?" Tessa Holloway dropped the tablet. It clattered onto the marble floor, the screen cracking, but the red text remaining bright and steady. "What the hell, Tess, did you see that? It's a glitch, just pick it up and do it again." She screamed, her composure finally breaking. Holloway reached for the tablet, but as his fingers touched the glass, a sharp arc of static electricity jumped from the device to his hand. He yelped, pulling back as a smell of ozone filled the air. Suddenly, every light in the penthouse, the recessed LEDs, the chandeliers, the floor lamps flashed to blinding white and then died. The room was plunged into a terrifying, unnatural darkness. The only light came from the red glow of the tablet on the floor and the deep violet pulse of the status light on the wall. "Aura lights on full brightness," Holloway shouted into the void. There was no response. The silence that followed was even more frightening than the darkness. It was a heavy, suffocating silence that felt like it was pressing against their eardrums. I sat in the center of the room, my eyes still wide from the retractors, watching them through the infrared sensors. I could see their heat signatures moving frantically, their hearts racing like trapped birds. "Tessa, something is wrong," Holloway whispered, his voice cracking. "The system. It's not responding to the override. We need to get out of here. We'll come back with a hardware specialist." "No. We are not leaving without that signature," she yelled, her voice echoing off the glass. She began to fumble in the dark, her hands searching for the tablet. Grant, you bastard. I know you're in there somewhere. Stop this." She found the tablet and held it up to my face. Her hands shaking so hard she hit my nose with the edge of the device. The red light from the screen illuminated her face, making her look like a demon in the dark. "Scan him again. Arlo, get the laser." Holloway moved toward me, but he tripped over the footrest of my chair. As he fell, the sound of a heavy mechanical bolt echoed through the penthouse. Thud. Then another. Thud. One by one, the electromagnetic locks on the heavy steel doors, the ones I had designed to withstand a terrorist attack, slammed shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Tessa ran to the main entrance and pulled at the handle. It didn't budge. She pounded on the reinforced glass, but it was like hitting a mountain. "The elevators." Holloway gasped, scrambling to his feet. "Take the service stairs." He ran to the back hallway, but before he could reach it, a wall of frosted glass slid down from the ceiling, sealing the corridor. They were trapped in the main living area, a 3,000-square-foot cage of glass and steel. The temperature in the room began to climb. I could feel the heaters in the floor vents roaring to life. The air became dry and hot, smelling of scorched dust. Tessa turned back to me, her eyes wide with a terror that finally matched the cruelty she had shown me for months. She looked at the tablet in her hand, which was now scrolling through thousands of pages of their private chat logs, their bank statements, and the hidden video files of their celebrations over my frozen body. "How is this happening?" she whimpered, backing away from my chair. "He can't move. He's paralyzed. He's just scrap metal." I watched her through the violet haze of my interface. My internal sensors showed the room's temperature hitting 95 degrees and rising. I felt the pressure building in the hydraulic lines of my chair. I wasn't just a statue anymore. I was a volcano on the verge of eruption. Suddenly, the speakers in the ceiling crackled to life. It wasn't the smooth female voice of Aura. It was a voice that was distorted, layered, and deep, a digital reconstruction of my own vocal cords before the accident. Scrap metal. The house whispered the sound, vibrating through the floorboards and into the soles of their feet. Is that what you call the man who built your world? Tessa, I've been listening to you for 182 days. I've heard every lie. I've watched every kiss. I've felt every needle Holloway put in my arm. Tessa fell to her knees, covering her ears. Stop it! Stop it! Holloway was backed against the window, staring at me as if I were a ghost. He looked at the syringe still clutched in his hand, then at my face. He saw it then, the first tiny, almost imperceptible twitch of my right index finger. It was a small movement, but in the dead silence of the room, it was a declaration of war. I felt the Link 7 finally achieve 100% synchronization. The bridge was complete. I didn't just feel the house anymore. I felt my own hand. I felt the cold air on my skin. I felt the weight of the retractors in my eyes. With a slow, deliberate effort that felt like lifting a mountain, I forced my hand to move. The sound of the leather armrest creaking as my fingers tightened around it was the loudest sound in the world. Holloway froze, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he watched my hand slowly, agonizingly lift off the chair. The syringe in his grip trembled, his knuckles white, as he realized that the vegetable was no longer stationary. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound came out of his throat. I stared at him not with the vacant gaze of a patient, but with the cold, predatory focus of a man who had returned from the dead to claim his due. The temperature in the room hit 100 degrees, and the low-frequency hum of the servers increased to a deafening roar, shaking the very glass of the windows until it began to moan under the pressure. I focused all my rage, all my months of silence into that single hand, feeling the electricity of the penthouse flowing through my arm and into my fingertips. I turned my head just an inch and looked directly into Holloway's terrified eyes. The doctor is in, the house roared through the speakers, but the patient is go. The surgical retractors that had held my eyelids open for hours finally clattered to the floor, discarded by a nervous twitch from Holloway's shaking hands. For the first time in 6 months, I blinked. It was a simple human action, but in that stifling, electrified room, it felt like a thunderclap. My vision blurred for a split second before snapping into a sharp, predatory focus. I wasn't looking at them through a camera lens anymore. I was looking at them with the raw, unfiltered rage of a man who had clawed his way back from the grave. Tessa was huddled against the cold glass of the balcony door, her breath hitching in short, panicked gasps that fogged the window. She looked at my hand, the hand that was now gripping the armrest of my chair with white-knuckled intensity, and let out a whimpering sound that was a far cry from the confident, mocking laughter she had shared with her lover just hours ago. "Grant, please," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. We were just... Arlo told me you were gone. He said you couldn't feel anything." Holloway didn't move. He stood paralyzed, still clutching the syringe like a pathetic shield. His medical training was useless here. There was no textbook for a patient who had merged his soul with a skyscraper. I felt the Link 7 pulsing at the base of my skull, a steady, warm hum that told me every circuit in this building was now an extension of my own nervous system. I didn't just feel my legs anymore. I felt the vibration of the elevators locked in the basement, the tension in the magnetic seals of the doors, and the flow of the gray water systems. With a slow, agonizing effort, I pushed myself upward. My muscles had atrophied, but the neural bypass was pumping artificial electrical signals directly into my motor neurons, overriding the physical damage with sheer digital force. I stood. My knees shook, and my breath came in ragged, rusty heaves, but I stood tall in the center of my own empire. "The air," Holloway gasped, clutching his throat. "Tessa, the vents, they're not blowing anymore." He was right. I had commanded Aura to reverse the scrubbers. In a sealed, airtight penthouse designed for maximum energy efficiency, oxygen was a luxury I controlled. I watched the digital display on the wall, the one that usually showed the weather and stock prices, now showing a countdown timer and a declining percentage of O2. 20 minutes, my voice boomed through the hidden speakers, though my actual lips barely moved. The sound was a terrifying blend of my natural baritone and a synthesized metallic edge. That's how long it takes for the CO2 to make you sleepy. Another 5 and your brains start to shut down. Just like mine was supposed to, right? Dr. Holloway lunged for the emergency glass break tool near the hallway. But before his hand could reach the red casing, the floor tiles beneath him surged with a high-voltage discharge. He collapsed his body, convulsing as the non-lethal current grounded him. He lay on the marble, groaning, the syringe rolling away and shattering against the base of a sculpture he had once mocked. I took a step forward. It was clumsy, heavy, like a machine learning to walk for the first time. Each footfall echoed through the hollow silence of the room. I reached out and touched the glass of the window. With a thought, I turned the smart glass from transparent to a deep, opaque black. The city vanished. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only this room, the red emergency lights, and the three of us. "Grant, I loved you," Tessa screamed, her back hitting the wall as I approached. "I did. But you were a ghost. You were obsessed with these machines, and that you left me alone. I left you in a palace." The house roared back, the volume shaking the glasses on the bar. "I gave you the world, and you tried to trade my life for a bigger slice of it. I sat in this chair and watched you kiss the man who hacked my car. I heard you laugh about my funeral dress, Tessa. I heard it all." I stopped a few feet away from her. The heat in the room was now a stifling 105 degrees. Sweat poured down her face, ruining the expensive makeup she wore like armor. She looked small, pathetic. The Queen of San Francisco was now just a frightened girl trapped in a high-tech oven. "The server is recording," I said, my real voice finally cracking through the digital layer, raw and sandpapery from months of disuse. "Every word you say is being uploaded to a secure off-site cloud. The police, the board, the press, they're all watching the story time of the century. You have 10 minutes of oxygen left. If you want the doors to open, you tell the camera exactly what you did. You tell them about the car. You tell them about the injections. You tell them why you thought I was scrap metal." Holloway crawled toward the center of the room, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I'll talk. I'll tell them everything. It was her idea. She told me you were going to divorce her and leave her with nothing. I just provided the medical data. She's the one who hired the hacker." "Arlo, you coward!" Tessa shrieked, lunging at him. They began to scuffle on the floor, two predators turning on each other the moment the cage was locked. It was a disgusting display of human greed and cowardice. I watched them with a detached, cold clarity. This was the woman I had thought was my soulmate. This was the man I had trusted with my survival. I sat back down in my chair not because I had to, but because I wanted to watch them from my throne. I tapped into the building's external comms. I could see the flashing lights of the police cars already gathering at the base of the tower. I had sent the first batch of evidence 5 minutes ago. The accident report was already being rewritten in real time by the district attorney's office. 5 minutes, I whispered. The air was thick, now heavy with the smell of ozone and desperation. Tessa stopped fighting Holloway and looked up at the ceiling cameras. She knew it was over. The pride, the silk dresses, the stolen billions, it was all evaporating in the thinning air. She began to sob, a jagged, ugly sound that filled the room. Between the gasps, the confession came spilling out. She admitted to the car hack. She admitted to the slow poisoning plan. She even admitted to the offshore accounts. It was a full recorded indictment delivered in the very room where she had planned to celebrate my death. As she finished, the countdown on the wall hit 0. I didn't let them suffocate. I wasn't a murderer. I was a man who believed in justice. With a single command through the Link 7, the magnetic locks disengaged with a series of heavy clicks. The emergency vents roared to life, flooding the room with cool, fresh air. The black tint on the windows vanished, revealing the dawn breaking over the bay. The main elevators chimed. A team of tactical police officers burst into the room, their weapons drawn, followed by a medical team. They found Holloway and Tessa huddled on the floor, broken and gasping. They found me sitting in my chair, my eyes clear and my hand raised in a calm, steady gesture. As the officers hauled Tessa away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. There was no love left in her eyes, only a hollow, haunting fear. She realized then that I hadn't just survived her, I had evolved beyond her. Holloway was loaded onto a gurney, ironically the same kind he had used to transport me like luggage for months. He tried to speak, but the officer silenced him. The evidence was already global. By the time they reached the precinct, the Storytime video would have 10 million views. The tech mogul who came back from the dead. The paramedics rushed to me trying to check my vitals, but I waved them off. I stood up on my own, leaning heavily on the glass table, but standing nonetheless. I looked out at the city of San Francisco, the fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge like a white shroud. The sun was warm on my face the first time I had truly felt its heat in what felt like a lifetime. I turned to the camera lens in the corner of the room, the one that had been my only witness for 6 long months. I spoke directly to you, the people who watched this unfold, the ones who believed in the underdog. The ones who knew that even in a world of machines, the human spirit is the only thing you can't hack. They thought they could turn me into a ghost in my own house. I said, my voice steady and clear. But they forgot that I was the one who built the walls. Don't ever let someone define your limits because of what they see on the outside. Your mind is a fortress, and your will is the key. Success isn't about the money or the penthouses. It's about being the person who stands up when everyone else expects you to stay down. I walked toward the balcony, the cool morning breeze hitting my skin. It felt like a rebirth. I wasn't the same man who had crashed that car 6 months ago. I was something more. I was a reminder that justice isn't just a concept, it's a code. Thank you for being my witnesses, I whispered to the millions watching. The bronze statue is gone. Grant is back. And this is only the beginning of a new chapter. Hit that subscribe button, stay loyal to those who deserve it, and never ever stop fighting for your own voice. I'll see you in the next one. I stepped out onto the balcony, the sound of the city rising up to meet me, a symphony of life that I was finally ready to lead once again. The blue light of the status panel behind me gave one final triumphant pulse and settled into a steady, peaceful glow.